So we're speaking about Klipat Noga, which is really, the theme of this week's of this chapter 7 here in opening the Tanya. Klipat Noga is that neutral realm, as we've mentioned now many times, that can and must be elevated to the holiness, to the side of holiness. Otherwise, it almost automatically goes to the side of impurity, of shalosh klipot atmeot, what he calls the 3 impure klipot, or the sitra achra, the other side. And this involves probably most of the activities of the day, such as eating, such as sleeping. And those were the examples that he brought as of late, that if one, for example, eats, right, that was the example, eats fat beef and drinks spiced wine, which in and of itself is considered maybe a coarse activity. But if you eat it in order to broaden your mind for the service of God and his Torah, then you are using this fat beef and this spiced wine and this activity altogether to the side of holiness, and therefore it is then that klipat noga then becomes holy. So that's the general idea. And let's continue. We just said, Margot, bottom of page 180. Or in order to fulfill the mitzvah to pleasure oneself on the Shabbat and festival. Still continuing with that example. If you eat fat beef and you drink spiced wine, but to fulfill the mitzvah of pleasuring oneself on the Shabbat and festivals, which, by the way, is indeed a mitzvah, that on Shabbat, we say that on Shabbat, there are many activities that may be considered mundane, but because they're on Shabbat, and if you do them for the pleasure of Shabbat, then they become holy in order to serve the Shabbat. It's part of this commandment in the Torah, this biblical commandment, the karatala Shabbat oneg, that God called Shabbat pleasure. And therefore, any pleasurable activity that is done for the sake of Shabbat, for the sake of the pleasure on Shabbat, is considered to be holy, such as eating fat beef or whatever it is that he's saying here, or even sleeping. Some say that the initials of Shabbat, Shin Bet Taf, are the initials of Sheina b'Shabbat Ta'anug, which means sleep on Shabbat is pleasurable, and pleasurable in a good way, in a holy way, because again, we're doing this in order to honor the Shabbat. The Rabbi Chaim Ben Attar, who was one of the great mystics of Jewish history, perhaps, he was a Moroccan rabbi who lived some 400 years ago. He has a commentary on the entire Chumash, one of the commentaries that are indeed published on the entire Torah, and eventually moved to Israel. He's buried in the Mount of Olives. He's that grave that stood erect among all the destroyed graves by the Palestinians in 1948 that came and destroyed that cemetery. And the reason it stood erect, I think it's a story that we mentioned, is because they tried to destroy it, but each time unsuccessfully. One time the bulldozer flipped over and the driver died. The other time when they came with the hammer exploded in the guy's face. They said, this guy must be a holy man. But I'm mentioning him because he would fast all week long. And when Shabbat came, he would eat like no one else eats. And to the point that, in Morocco, back in the day, they married multiple wives. And he had 2 wives. His first wife was Patsonia. And when he married his second wife, it was her honor to prepare the Shabbat. So she prepared the Shabbat, but she didn't know how much he eats on Shabbat. So he finished everything already on Friday night. That's how the story goes. And thank God the first wife knew how much he ate. So she prepared more food. So he had more food for the rest of Shabbat. But here we go. We see a classic example of what the Tanya is saying, that eating on Shabbat, if you do it for the honor of Shabbat, is considered to be a mitzvah. So that's just to dwell on this little example here. But let's continue. Page 180. To pleasure oneself on the Shabbat. Does anyone want to read? Bottom of page 180.
I'll read.
Oh, thank you, Mom. Go for it.
Okay. To pleasure oneself on the Shabbat and festivals with meat and wine and other delicacies is a mitzvah. Nevertheless, the Kavanah plays a crucial role in elevating the food to holiness. For the mitzvah is to enjoy the Sabbath, not simply to experience physical pleasure on the Sabbath. So unless the feasting is accompanied by a constant awareness and intent that one's enjoyment is for the sake of the Sabbath, rather than for the pleasure of one's stomach, it remains the pleasure of one's stomach and does not ascend to holiness.
Right. So this isn't one of the areas in which, and by the way, not all mitzvahs are like this, but this is one mitzvah in which the intention here is very important. That the way you intend it to be, that's the way it will be. If you intend it to be a mitzvah and you're eating in order really to honor the Shabbat, then it's a mitzvah. If you don't, if you intend it to be just an act of self-pleasure or for the benefit of your stomach and your taste buds, then it's not a mitzvah. Then it's not considered a mitzvah. So the intention here has tremendous influence on this. By the way, I think it has a lot to do also, if we want to broaden and deepen this subject, but the reason why the intention here matters, unlike other mitzvahs, by the way, some for example, the mitzvah of tzedakah we've spoken about, whether you intend to give tzedakah and to help a poor person or you don't, at the end of the day, those $5 are benefiting that poor person just as much as if you had a good intention or you didn't have a good intention. They're buying the exact same food for that family, for that poor man. But going back to the Shabbat is also a day in which we are told to be more refined. It's a day in which indeed we are elevated to a state of holiness that is what's called in the books, Me'ein Olam Haba. There's a song like that we sing on Shabbat, Me'ein Olam Haba. It's a little bit like the world to come. It's a taste of the world to come. That's what Shabbat is. Now, if we are indeed tasting the world to come, if we're indeed being elevated to such a state, then it's not just the action that counts. It's also the intention that counts. And because that's what the world to come is about. You see, this world, we mentioned this also, there are 4 worlds in general in Jewish mysticism. This world is called the world of action. That's a world in which indeed action counts most. And that's why Judaism focuses so much on action. Out of the 613 commandments, most of them, the vast majority, are action-based. Because it's a world of action where God needs our action much more than our intention. But the more elevated we are, and the more elevated we become through the Shabbat, because again, if we are indeed tasting the world to come, then we are rousing or ascending from this world of action. Where to? To a world in which now intention also becomes very important. And therefore on Shabbat, we are asked to focus also on our intention, not just on our action. Thus, we find that many mitzvahs of Shabbat include one's intention, because that in the world to come is almost just as important as action, unlike this world. But on Shabbat, we're in a different space. We're in a different reality. So intention there counts a lot. And therefore, again, the emphasis on intention during this mitzvah of Shabbat, of eating food for one's pleasure. Yes, Linda.
Don't actions always have intentions? You know, like I mean, whenever you do something, I think you have an intention. I understand what you're talking about, you know, the mitzvah and eating and honoring Shabbat. But one of the biggest messages that you have taught me over the years is that it's all about your actions. That it's like, you know, you can talk a lot and talk and talk and talk, but if you only talk and don't do, then it's not as meaningful. But to me, actions do have intentions, you know, and maybe there's a more special intention or a different intention with respect to Shabbat, but it's like, I've really learned to understand the concept of actions versus just wishing for something or hoping it will happen.
No, good point. And you're right. Actions should have intentions.
They should.
The question is if they count as good actions if they don't have intentions, right?
Okay.
So for most
that.
mitzvahs, they do count. For the mitzvah of pleasure on Shabbat and eating on Shabbat, they don't count if you don't have that intention. Why is it unique for those mitzvahs of Shabbat? Because Shabbat is a day of intention more than a day of action. Because we're tasting the world to come.
Okay, that was beautiful.
Thank you. Right. No, thank you for that question. And it's important to understand this because I think it has a lot to do with the general puzzle that God created for us. It's a powerful one if we really think about this, Shabbat versus the rest of the week. So the rest of the week, we launch ourselves into actions, and we're asked at least to launch ourselves into actions, into mitzvahs, whether we have the intention or not. On Shabbat, God says, no. Thank you for your actions during the 6 days of the week. But now I also need your intention. Why? Because the essence of Shabbat is a day of intention, is a day in which we have to return to ourselves and look not just at our external actions, but also our internal intentions. It's a day in which we have to connect to our soul. That's what Shabbat is all about. Stopping everything that is worldly and going to our heavenly part, to God himself and to the soul in us. That's what Shabbat is all about. Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik was the founder of the Yeshiva University, truly a luminary of our times. He would refer to the days of the week versus the Shabbat as the two facets that exist in us. On the days of the week, we use what he called Adam 1. And on the Shabbat, we use the other facet in us, which he called Adam 2. The difference between the two is Adam 1 is the one that wants to go out and conquer the world. Adam 1 is the builder. Adam 1 is the human doing. Adam 2 is the human being. Is the one that doesn't need the world. He just wants to meditate inwardly. He's not the one that doesn't care too much about worldly achievements. He cares more about nurturing himself and his family. That's Adam 1. Now, we need a healthy balance. Sorry, that's Adam 2. But we need a healthy balance between Adam 1 and Adam 2. God almost creates that structure for us by making the 6 days of the week all about action, and then by making Shabbat all about intention. And through focusing on those two ideas, 6 days of the week on action and on Shabbat on intention, then we can create a healthy balance between those two facets of Adam 1 and Adam 2. Thus again, the focus on Shabbat is more the intention. Even if we're eating, and we ought to eat on Shabbat, but let's have an intention in that eating. By the way, that's what Shabbat is, not considered just to be a holy day for the title, but it's a holy day also in our actions that are driven by intention. For example, prayer. We spend a lot of time on prayer on Shabbat. People tell me that, and here at CBT, we pray for too long on Shabbat, but that's the whole purpose. That's the day of prayer. Yes, if you come at 7 o'clock in the morning and Shacharit, we're done in 35 minutes. On Shabbat, it will take us about 3 hours, but because that's the purpose of Shabbat. It's the focus on the soul, the focus on the intention. By the way, the Kabbalists point out that the word Shabbat has the same exact letters as the word for teshuvah, which means to not just to repent, but to return. Because on Shabbat, we're returning. If during the 6 days of the week, we're going out, on Shabbat, we're going in. And therefore, we spend it on studying, spending on praying. We spend it on the soul. We spend on our time with God. And we spend it on even eating, but eating with that intention of holiness. Without that intention, we miss the whole point of Shabbat. Really, that's the beauty between the two. I think that our world today has a lot of 6 days, but they have very little of the Shabbat. They have a lot of Adam 1s, but there aren't too many Adam 2s, which is pitiful, because that's really what creates this healthy balance in the human being between his doing and his being, between his body and his soul, between, if you will, his mind and his spirit. Without the focus on the intention, then we can get lost in the action of the 6 days of the week. And by losing our intention, we're also losing ourselves, or at least a part of ourselves, our Adam 2. I think that, I have a friend in Chicago. It's not the Goldmans, Linda. I have a friend in Chicago, but he did very well for himself. And he told me the story many years ago, how first thing he did is that he went to buy a Bentley, which was the car of his dreams. So he went to buy a Bentley, and he goes out for his first drive, and he's showing off his Bentley, and he's feeling all good about himself and his achievements. And then he drives through this narrow alley, and all of a sudden this huge rock hits his door, his driver's door. And he stops, shrieks, he stops the car, and he's all mad. He comes out, he threw this rock, my brand new Bentley, what's happening? And he sees this little child who's trembling and seems all guilty. And says, did you throw this rock? He says, yes, I threw this rock, but that was my only way to stop you. And then the child points to the middle of the street where the man sees a disabled child, unfortunately, that fell off his wheelchair. Oh, wow. And this child that was trembling and feeling all guilty said, you see, this is my brother. he was crossing the street and he fell off his wheelchair,
Mm.
and you were completely oblivious. You were speeding through this narrow alley, and you probably wouldn't have seen him. So I had to stop you by throwing a rock.
Hmm.
And the man felt so bad. And he said, look, I was all about me, my achievements, my Adam 1, that I forgot to really be also sensitive, be that Adam 2, that is soulful. So he told me he never went to the body shop of cars to fix his dent. He always left it as a reminder that you can't be too engrossed in your Adam 1. You got to be also cognizant and also in a way develop and nurture your Adam 2, which is again going back to what the Tanya is saying here, that on Shabbat, we're asked to work on our intention, not just on our action. Because otherwise we're not wholesome human beings.
Is it the same like on Chagim, like on Yom Kippur and things like that? Because you'd still have to have the intention.
Right, that's very good. Chagim is the same thing. Chagim is, it's interesting because Chagim, holidays, so we spoke about the word Shabbat, which means to return to yourself or going in. The word for holidays in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, when God tells us to have holidays, he calls them Mo'adim, right? Or in the words of the Torah, Ele Mo'adei Hashem, B'krei Kodesh. These are the Mo'adim, the holidays of Hashem that are called holy. Mo'adim in Hebrew does not just mean holidays. Mo'adim also comes from the word Yi'ud, or Va'ad in Hebrew, which means meeting. Why? Because holidays are our meeting with God. God says, I need a meeting with you. Put it on your calendar. Let's have a one-on-one. And that indeed is working on Adam too, right? On our soul. So the holidays fulfill that same purpose. You're correct. Yeah.
So I want to go back to actions and intentions, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I understand how you talk about intentions being the focus of Shabbat, and that's really, but I also believe that the other 6 days, our actions are still related to intention, and perhaps the actions are more pressing, more important. But I think almost everything we do in life is related to intention. Now, that does not mean every intention is a good one, right, or a benevolent one. I mean, I'm not saying that, but I think as we live our lives and our daily actions, they are related to our intentions of taking care of ourselves, of earning money, of whatever. And they're maybe not as spiritual and thoughtful as on Shabbat, but I believe, intentions are preceding all actions for everybody.
Right, I would agree. Intentions certainly elevate our actions, and in a way also make them more effective. At the end of the day, I mean, you see that especially, what?
I said, those are good intentions. I mean,
yeah, bad intentions, no, but do the opposite. Right.
Right, exactly.
But I'm saying you see that especially with children. Children have that sixth sense, so to speak, where if you do something without intention or with a bad intention, God forbid, then they feel it. Oh, thank you for giving me this gift, or thank you for saying I love you, but you don't intend it. They sense it, and then it almost impedes on the action, on the goodness of the action itself. So intentions, in a way, do count, but if you had a choice between doing a good action without intention or not doing it at all, do it anyhow.
Yeah.
But I will say this, to go back to the Shabbat, because in a way, that's the whole purpose of Shabbat, that the more we are in tune with ourselves on the Shabbat, the more the actions of the 6 days of the week will be fueled with that intention. And therefore will be elevated by that intention of the Shabbat. The Zohar says that Shabbat minay, the foremost book of Kabbalah, right? Shabbat minay mitbarchin kulho yomin. That on Shabbat, all the days of the week are blessed from Shabbat. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Up until Friday, we're still benefiting from the blessing of the Shabbat beforehand. All the days of the week are blessed and in a way fueled by Shabbat. So the more we work on our intention on Shabbat, the more we work really on the refinement of the self on Shabbat, then the more elevated our week will be, because that Shabbat is again blessing the entire week. It's like, I don't know if I've ever shared with you the story, but just comes to mind when I was living in Italy. So I remember being very, very deeply inspired by a woman by the name of Bassi Garelic, who was really the wife of the late chief rabbi of Italy, Rabbi Gershom Mendel Garelic, who passed away about a year ago. And she was, in fact, sent together with her husband to Italy in 1957 by the late Lubavitcher Rebbe. Italy had suffered tremendously throughout the Holocaust. It never quite revived its Judaism that was once the glory of the world of Judaism altogether. Many, many greats came from Italy, especially in Livorno, Pisa, not far away from the Tower of Pisa, and of course in Rome and other places. And she was sent there really to revive Judaism by the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, and she decided to leave. She came from New York, and she had a teacher of hers who said to her, Bassi, I think you're making a very bad mistake. Look at you, you're a young lady, you're full of passion towards Judaism, you grew up in this beautiful community in New York, you're going to go with your husband to Italy, and there's nothing in Italy that's Jewish, and you're going to assimilate very quickly. The children are certainly going to assimilate. And then the teacher went on to tell Bassi, it's like taking hot water and mixing it with cold water. What happens with the hot water is it becomes cold. So you're going into cold waters, you're going to become cold. And Bassi is a very sharp-minded woman, responded to her teacher, it's true. If you take hot water and you mix it with cold water, then it becomes cold. But if the hot water remains on the stovetop, on the fire, no matter how much cold water you add to it, it will always be hot. She said to her teacher, I'm staying on the fire. You don't have to worry. I'll be connected. And in a way, I think if we had to use that metaphor for Shabbat versus days of the week, that's the metaphor I would use. Shabbat is that fire. The days of the week, we're out in the cold waters. But Shabbat is the day in which we really connect and have to fuel that soul with the fire of Hashem. And that's again, all these intentions and spiritual activities on Shabbat. Now, if we're hot on Shabbat, then we can go out to the days of the week, and our actions, like you were saying, Linda, our actions are then influenced by that heat. The actions still feel the heat of the Shabbat. But if we don't have that connection on Shabbat, if we don't have that stovetop, so to speak, then our actions can unfortunately lose their intensity of heat, so to speak, lose their passion a little bit. But I think more and more in our day and age, on what David Brooks calls the age of distraction. In our age of distraction, I think people are realizing the gift of the Shabbat more than ever. To have a day in which we're disconnected and really are truly focused on Adam too, on that stovetop, on that fire, is I think more needed in our day and age than any other age. But that's the beauty. Again, going back to the Tanya, that's why so much focus on the intention. Any other comments, questions? I welcome them all. Disagreements? No? Okay, otherwise we can continue. Again, bottom of page 180. The general rule, right? That's where we're up to, the general rule. Does anyone want to read? Unless Margot, you want to continue to read?
Sure, I'll continue.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the general rule is that Klipa Noga includes those things that are permitted by Torah law, and therefore can, by various means, be transferred from Klipa to holiness, even if they are not directly involved in the performance of a mitzvah, an actual fulfillment of the divine command. When a person extracts the valuable from the vile, as in the analogy of metal refining in Jeremiah 15:19, he performs what is one of the greatest acts of holiness and divine service. However, this operation requires an absolute and unequivocal awareness of what one is doing, how he is doing it, and for what purpose. One needs to be conscious at all times of everything that he eats, speaks, or does, so that every bite he takes or every word he utters is with an express intention for the sake of heaven.
Right. So the analogy of the metal refining in Jeremiah is this analogy in which when one refines metal, if you don't know what you're doing, then it can become a very dangerous action. You really have to be fully focused on the metal refining. I'm no maven in metal refining, maybe some of you are, but if you make one tiny little mistake, you can create fire, you can burn yourself, you can harm yourself quite severely. And therefore the intention in matter refining is so important. And here it's almost the same thing. When we eat on Shabbat, then if there's no intention, if we are not eating in order really to elevate this food and elevate the Shabbat altogether by honoring it through food, then we can be, God forbid, causing harm upon ourselves. We've almost defiled the act of eating, and we're not elevating it. Just like this idea of metal refining, in which again tremendous focus is necessary. Now, it's true, as he continues to say, not just with eating, but any type of neutral activity. When one speaks, one has to be very careful in what he says. You know, the Kotzker Rebbe famously said, I think we've mentioned this many times, but that not everything that is thought needs to be said. Not everything that is said needs to be written. Not everything that is written needs to be published. And not everything that is published needs to be read. Why? Because again, there needs to be this tremendous act of thinking, of intention, of refinement before we can extricate the good from the bad, or as he puts it here, the valuable from the vile. And that is done with tremendous intention, just like metal refining. Otherwise, there's harm that could come out from this. Again, we live in an age of distraction, or an age of impulsivity or impulsiveness, where people, you know, are quite impulsive, and I'll just write what I want to write. I'll just say what I want to say. I'll just be what I want to be. And in a way, we lose the valuable in the vile. It stops us from extracting the good in everything because of that impulsiveness. But that really is in a way very much what intention is all about. Intention is really thinking of how I can extract this spark of God within the words that I'm about to say, within the food that I'm about to eat, within any neutral activity that I'm about to engage in. How can I extract the spark? How can I connect to it and extract it so that it shines through my words, so that it shines through my food? That's what intention is all about. If you had to look it up in the Oxford Dictionary, you might not see that definition, but that's the Tanya definition of intention. Intention is about asking the question of how can I connect and elevate the sparks of God within everything. My words, my actions, whatever it may be. And if we can really see the good and then connect to it and extract it and make sure that that shines, then we've fulfilled the power of intention. Otherwise, it can really harm, like the analogy of metal refining. So that's the idea, and that explains why, by the way, you know, the Talmud says the Hasidim Rishonim, first Hasidim, this is first Hasidim, was 2,000 years ago, before the Hasidic movement came about even. The Talmud was written then. So the first Hasidim would spend an hour and a half at least before prayer, not even during prayer, before prayer, bekoved rosh, in meditation or in contemplation, and just sit with themselves. They didn't have any text. They didn't have any davening, any prayer to say. They sat with themselves, bekoved rosh, which is literally translated as a heavy head, with heaviness of thought. And why? Again, so that their intention then is so refined that the metal refining that they're about to engage in, or the spiritual metal refining, or the other types, or even a physical metal refining they're about to engage in, will not be harmful. Then they'll be able to extract the valuable from the vile. Now, I don't know if we have the time to do that today. We're all so busy. And I don't know if we can sit for an hour and a half every day just for ourselves, but I think we can do that for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Imagine starting the day with just five minutes. I'll tell you a little secret, and I hope it's materialized very soon. One of the big ideas that the Lubavitch Rebbe, blessed memory, would shout about was that every school, every public school should start with a moment of silence. For that purpose, really, so that children can connect to themselves and connect to the good in themselves and connect to God in a way. Now, you have to separate church and state, so these to connect to the God in them. And every school he would shout, and I think it was in times of Ronald Reagan, they partially passed the law and it worked for a little bit, but then many states return to not having this moment of silence, which is a pity, because I really believe that if people were more connected to the God in themselves and to God altogether, there would be less crime in the world. And so we're right now working with Governor Ducey to introduce this law once again, moment of silence, so that kids can connect again to the, because I really believe, and like the Lubavitcher Rebbe believed, who am I to say, but greater people believed in this, that if we have that power of intention, if we can really be careful about this extracting of the valuable from the vile, then our world would be better. And sometimes we can't spend an hour and a half, but we can have a moment of silence every day, 5-minute moment, not of praying. Again, it's not nothing to do with prayer, nothing to do with text, just being with your divine self for a few minutes, then our world would be better. And I hope it passes soon. But that's the big idea, really. That in a way is what fuels then the power of our actions and ensures that they are as effective as possible.